Have you ever felt like you're moving through life, but you're not sure if you're actually on the right path? As if you're making decisions, working, moving forward, yet deep inside, something still asks, am I really going in the right direction? Many people reach a point in life where they realize there are many paths in front of them, but only a few truly lead to peace, purpose, and the life God intended. In this video, we're going to reflect on one of the most profound statements Jesus ever made when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What did he really mean by that? Why do so many people still feel lost even when they're trying to do what is right? And how can we practically discern whether we are following the path that truly leads to life, or just a path that seems right but ultimately leads somewhere else? If you have ever felt confused about important decisions, questioned the direction of your life, or simply want to understand how to find spiritual direction in the middle of so many voices and choices, this video may open your eyes to something many people go their entire lives without realizing. So stay with me until the end, because the truth Jesus revealed about the path could completely change the way you see your own journey. Before we continue, it's worth making a brief note. This content was developed with the help of artificial intelligence tools to assist in organizing ideas, conducting biblical research, and structuring the reflection you are watching. Even so, every message you hear here is grounded in the scriptures and in the teachings of Jesus. The goal is simply to make these spiritual truths clearer, deeper, and more accessible for those who are seeking direction in their own journey. Now, to begin understanding why the question of the path is so important, we first need to look at something many people experience today, even though they rarely talk about it out loud. There is a quiet feeling that many people carry, even when everything seems to be functioning normally on the outside. They wake up early, fulfill their responsibilities, work, solve problems, make plans, and keep moving forward in the routine of life. From the outside, everything appears to be in order. But in moments of silence, a question arises that many people never say out loud. Am I really on the right path? This question often appears unexpectedly. Sometimes it comes at the end of a long and tiring day, when there is finally a moment to rest. At other times, it surfaces during a conversation, a change in life circumstances, or even in a moment of prayer. It's as if something inside the person is trying to draw attention to a restlessness they still cannot fully explain. Often, this feeling has nothing to do with failure. In fact, some people begin to feel this question precisely when things seem to be going well. They have work, responsibilities, projects, and even important achievements. Yet there is still a kind of emptiness that is difficult to define, as if something essential has not yet been found. This happens because moving forward is not the same as moving in the right direction. Modern life values constant motion. We are taught to advance, produce, achieve, and build something meaningful. But we are rarely taught to pause and reflect on whether the direction we are following truly leads to the destination our soul is searching for. And when this reflection finally happens, many people realize something uncomfortable. They have been walking for a long time, yet they are not entirely sure where that path is actually leading. This feeling often becomes stronger during specific seasons of life. Career transitions, family changes, personal crises, or periods of spiritual reflection frequently awaken a deeper awareness about one's own journey. A person begins to look both backward and forward at the same time, trying to understand whether the choices made so far are truly aligned with the purpose they desire to live. At that point, another important realization begins to emerge. Life presents many different paths. Paths that promise fulfillment, security, recognition, pleasure, or stability. Each of them seems to offer some kind of answer to the human search for meaning and happiness. Some paths promise financial success. Others promise personal freedom. Others promise social approval or a sense of accomplishment. And all of them can seem convincing, especially when we see many people walking in the same direction. The problem is that popularity is not the same as truth. A path can be followed by crowds and still fail to lead to the right destination. The Bible reveals this reality very clearly in Proverbs 14:12, which says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." This statement reveals something profound about the human experience. We do not always immediately realize when we are following a direction that does not lead to true life. A path may seem logical, reasonable, and even promising at the beginning. It may bring immediate benefits, opportunities, or a sense of progress. But over time, something begins to happen inside the person. Even while moving forward, they start to feel an inner weight that is difficult to explain. A sense of emptiness, spiritual disconnection, or lack of purpose begins to surface. This happens because the human mind tends to evaluate paths only by what is visible in the moment. We consider factors like opportunity, comfort, security, or social acceptance. But we rarely see the deeper spiritual consequences of a direction. Not every path that looks good leads to the life God intended. And that is exactly why so many people, even while living with effort, dedication, and responsibility, eventually reach a point where they realize that something inside them is not fully aligned. They did not stop trying to live well. They did not stop working, building, or seeking stability. But they begin to realize that living well and moving in the right direction are not always the same thing. And when this awareness finally appears, a new question begins to emerge in the heart. If there are so many paths in life, how can we know which one truly leads to real life? That question prepares the ground for understanding something Jesus taught with remarkable clarity. Once a person begins to realize that they may not be completely certain about the direction of their life, something interesting happens. They begin to look around for references. They observe what other people are doing, which paths seem to be working for others, and which choices appear to bring happiness or fulfillment. This is natural. At some point, all of us try to understand life by observing the paths other people are taking. Culture, society, and even the environment in which we grew up strongly influence how we interpret what it means to follow the right direction. The problem is that many of the paths encouraged by modern culture are presented in extremely attractive ways. They promise quick happiness, recognition, stability, or a sense of personal freedom. At first glance, they seem to offer exactly what many people are searching for. Some of these ideas appear repeatedly in different areas of life. For example, many cultural messages encourage people to simply follow their desires, as if the human heart were always a safe guide for every decision. Other ideas suggest that the main goal of life is to achieve success, accumulate wealth, or reach a certain level of recognition. In other cases, social pressure pushes people to constantly seek approval, trying to live in a way that is admired or validated by others. None of these things on their own seem wrong at the beginning. The desire to prosper, to build a stable life, or to be recognized is not necessarily negative. The problem arises when these things become the main criteria for deciding which path to follow. At that point, the path begins to feel increasingly comfortable. It does not require deep changes in the heart. It does not require spiritual reflection. It does not require inner transformation. A person simply continues moving in the same direction that many others are already following. And that is exactly why these paths appear so attractive. Jesus described this reality very clearly in Matthew 7:13 when he said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many." When Jesus spoke about the wide path, he was describing exactly this kind of direction that seems easy, natural, and popular. It is the path that does not demand deep questioning. It is the path that simply follows the flow of culture, social expectations, and human inclinations. The problem is that a path can be easy to start and still lead to a destination a person never truly wanted to reach. Many people begin this kind of journey believing they are building a fulfilling life. They invest years pursuing goals that seem important at that moment. But as time passes, something begins to reveal itself. Even after achieving external success, some people realize that the satisfaction they expected does not last. The joy that seemed just ahead quickly fades, and new goals appear as if life always requires chasing the next achievement. This creates a quiet cycle of constant pursuit. A person keeps moving forward, keeps trying, keeps searching, yet never arrives at a place of genuine inner peace. The reason is deeper than it appears. When the direction of life is defined only by human expectations, it may produce external achievements, but it rarely fills the deepest spiritual need of the soul. The human soul was not created merely to accumulate experiences, accomplishments, or recognition. It was created to live in relationship with God. And when that spiritual dimension is ignored, even the most promising paths can eventually leave a persistent feeling that something essential is still missing. That is why it is so important to understand something many people only realize after years of walking in the wrong direction. The fact that a path is popular or comfortable does not mean it leads to true life. And this reality leads us to an even more important question. If so many paths seem good at the beginning, why do so many people end up following a direction that ultimately does not lead to the life they were truly searching for? There is something about human nature that often goes unnoticed. Most people do not consciously choose to follow the wrong path. In fact, almost everyone believes they are doing the best they can with the information, experiences, and perceptions they have at that moment. The decisions seem reasonable, the steps seem logical, and the direction chosen appears to make sense within the reality the person can see. That is exactly why so many people end up following paths that later prove to be mistaken. Error rarely begins with a clearly bad choice or with a decision that appears dangerous from the start. Most of the time it begins with small decisions that seem harmless, or with directions that feel safe simply because many other people are going the same way. There is a kind of psychological comfort in following the crowd. When we observe many people making the same decisions, we naturally assume that direction must be reliable. After all, if so many people are walking down the same road, it seems unlikely that everyone could be heading toward the wrong destination. This way of thinking creates a sense of collective security. A person looks around, sees friends, colleagues, family members, and even successful figures following a certain lifestyle or making certain decisions, and concludes that this must be the safest direction. But the Bible warns us that the majority is not always following the path that leads to life. Jesus spoke about this very directly in Matthew 7:14, when he said, "For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." This statement is profound because it reveals something many people do not expect to hear. The path that leads to true life is not always the most visible or the most popular. It is not necessarily the most comfortable, the easiest, or the most commonly followed. This happens because following the right path often requires something that does not always come naturally to human beings: spiritual discernment. It requires stopping, reflecting, examining motivations, and evaluating the direction of our lives in the light of God's truth. And this kind of deep reflection is often avoided in the rush of modern life. People are busy, overwhelmed with responsibilities, and constantly exposed to new information and external pressures. In that rhythm, many decisions are made almost automatically, without the time needed for a careful inner examination. Without this discernment, it becomes very easy to confuse things that look similar on the surface, but are profoundly different in essence. For example, many people confuse comfort with purpose. If a choice feels easy, pleasant, or socially accepted, they assume it must be a sign that they are on the right path. Others confuse success with spiritual direction. When a decision produces positive external results, such as financial growth, recognition, or professional progress, it is common to assume automatically that the direction must be aligned with God's will. There is also a very common confusion between human approval and truth. When people around us praise our choices or validate our decisions, it can create a sense of security that does not always correspond to spiritual reality. The problem is that these confusions rarely appear clearly. They do not arrive as a warning saying something is wrong. On the contrary, many times everything seems to be working perfectly. Life continues moving forward, the results appear positive, and the choices seem to make sense according to human logic. And that is exactly how many people spend years walking in a direction that slowly moves them away from the spiritual life God desires for them. Not because they consciously decided to move away from God, but because they never stopped to deeply examine the path they were following. Over time, however, some people begin to notice certain inner signs: a persistent sense of restlessness, a spiritual emptiness that is difficult to explain, a feeling that, even though everything seems fine on the outside, something inside needs to be realigned. These moments of awareness can be uncomfortable, but they are also extremely important. Many times, it is in these moments that a person begins to realize they need something more than simply continuing to do what they have always done. They begin to realize that they need true direction, a direction that does not depend only on human opinions, cultural trends, or social expectations. And it is exactly at this point that the teachings of Jesus become profoundly relevant, because he did not come merely to point out mistakes or criticize human paths. He came to reveal the path that truly leads to life. If this reflection is already helping you see your own journey with greater clarity, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the upcoming videos that bring deeper biblical reflections to help you better understand life, faith, and the purpose God has for each person. Now, after understanding why so many people end up following directions that seem right, but do not lead to true life, we need to look at one of the most powerful statements Jesus ever made about the path of life. Once we realize that there are many paths in life, and that not all of them lead to the right destination, an important question naturally arises. If so many directions seem possible, how can we discover which one truly leads to the life God desires? This question has accompanied humanity for centuries. People in different cultures, times, and contexts have always tried to understand which path leads to true life. Some search for the answer in philosophy, others in religious systems, others in personal experiences or different forms of spirituality. It was precisely in this context of spiritual searching that Jesus made one of the most profound statements recorded in Scripture. In John 14:6, he said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This statement is extraordinary because Jesus was not simply offering spiritual advice or presenting another idea among many others. He did not say that he knew the way, nor that he could show a way among several possibilities. He made a much more direct and profound declaration. He himself is the way. This statement completely changes how we understand the spiritual search. Many people imagine that finding direction for life means discovering the right principles, learning better strategies, or mastering techniques that help them make wiser decisions. But Jesus revealed something different. True direction does not begin with a method. It begins with a person. When he said, "I am the way," he was teaching that the spiritual journey is not simply about making correct decisions in isolation. It is about walking with someone who perfectly knows the destination. This means that the path to true life is not based only on human effort, personal discipline, or the attempt to build a morally correct life. True spiritual direction begins when a person starts trusting Christ and aligning their life with the teachings he revealed. This idea may seem simple at first, but it is deeply transformative. Many people spend years trying to build their own direction, based only on their logic, their emotions, or the expectations of the world around them. The problem is that the human mind has limits. Our thoughts are influenced by past experiences, social pressures, fears, temporary desires, and even by the circumstances we are facing in the present. Because of this, many decisions are made based only on what feels most convenient, safest, or most comfortable at the moment. And although those decisions may seem correct at first, they do not always lead to the life God intended. Jesus came to reveal that there is another way to live, a life where decisions are not guided merely by impulses, external pressures, or temporary circumstances, but by trust in someone who sees beyond what we are able to see. Following Jesus means allowing him to influence the direction of life. It means learning from his words, reflecting on his teachings, and gradually allowing those principles to transform the way we think, choose, and walk. This process does not happen instantly. The journey of faith is a continuous walk. Over time, a person develops spiritual sensitivity, begins to understand God's will more clearly, and starts to perceive which decisions align with the path that leads to life. At many moments, following the path of Christ may seem different from what the world considers logical or advantageous. Sometimes it means acting with humility when the culture encourages pride. At other times, it means choosing integrity when shortcuts seem easier. It may also mean trusting God during seasons of uncertainty, even when we do not have all the answers and the future still appears unclear. But it is precisely in this walk that something begins to happen inside the person. Gradually, life begins to gain a new clarity. Decisions stop being mere reactions to circumstances and begin to reflect a deeper spiritual direction. A person starts to understand that following Jesus is not only about believing certain spiritual truths. It is about allowing those truths to shape the way we live, think, and choose. This does not eliminate all of life's challenges. Problems, doubts, and difficult moments are still part of the human journey. The difference is that the person no longer depends solely on their own ability to find direction. They begin to walk with someone who knows the path, And this change in perspective profoundly transforms the way we see the choices of life, because it is no longer merely a search for human answers. It becomes a journey guided by God. But this leads to a very practical question that many people ask when they begin reflecting on these truths. If Jesus is the way, how can we discern in our daily lives whether we are truly walking in the direction He desires? After understanding that Jesus revealed the path that leads to life, a very practical question begins to arise. One that many people ask at some point in their spiritual journey. How can we know in real life whether we are actually walking in the right direction? That question is more common than it seems. Many people sincerely want to live in alignment with God. They want to make the right decisions, build a life with purpose, and feel that their choices are moving in a direction God approves of. But at the same time, there is a natural sense of uncertainty. Life presents many decisions, some small, others extremely important. Choices related to career, family, relationships, purpose, or faith can create deep inner doubts. And in those moments, many people ask themselves, how do I know if I am truly being guided by God, or if I am simply following my own thoughts? Part of that difficulty exists because God's direction does not always appear in the way we expect. Some people wait for extraordinary signs, immediate answers, or absolute certainty before making any decision. But when we look carefully at Scripture, we see that God often leads people in a more gradual way. Instead of revealing the entire path all at once, He usually shows the next step while the person continues walking in trust. This principle appears clearly in Proverbs 3:5-6, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths." This passage reveals something extremely important about spiritual discernment. God's direction begins with trust. It does not begin with total control of the situation, nor with the guarantee that every detail of the future is already clear. Many times God asks for something different, that a person learn to trust Him even when they still cannot see the entire road ahead. That means discerning the right direction does not depend only on logic or rational analysis. Of course, reflecting, evaluating options, and thinking wisely are part of the process. God gave us the ability to reason, and He expects us to use that ability responsibly. But spiritual direction also involves developing sensitivity to recognize how God is leading our lives. That sensitivity grows when a person begins to cultivate a deeper relationship with God. The closer someone draws to God through prayer, biblical reflection, and a sincere desire to know His will, the more they begin to notice patterns of spiritual guidance that previously went unnoticed. There are certain signs that often appear when a person begins walking in alignment with God's will. One of the first is alignment with Scripture. God's direction never contradicts the principles revealed in His Word. That means any decision or path that clearly contradicts biblical teaching is unlikely to represent God's guidance. Another important sign is inner peace. This peace does not mean the complete absence of doubts or challenges. Many important decisions still require courage and faith, but even in the middle of uncertainty, there is often a deep sense that this direction is aligned with something greater than temporary desires. Another essential element is humility to receive correction. People who truly want to walk in God's direction develop the ability to recognize when something in their life needs adjustment. They become willing to receive wise counsel, learn from mistakes, and consider the guidance of spiritually mature people. In addition, life begins to produce spiritual fruit. Over time, attitudes like patience, love, integrity, compassion, and sensitivity toward others begin to appear more clearly in a person's choices and relationships. These fruits do not appear instantly. Spiritual discernment is a process of growth. Just as a plant needs time to grow and bear fruit, spiritual maturity also develops gradually along the journey. The more a person learns to trust God and reflect on their own path, the more sensitive they become to the direction He is offering. This also means that no one needs to have all the answers before they begin to walk. Many times God reveals the next step only after we take the first step in faith. This kind of guidance requires something that is not always easy for the modern person: letting go of the illusion of absolute control. Many people want to make sure every variable is resolved before they move forward, but life does not work that way. The future will always contain elements we still cannot fully see. When a person learns to trust God in that process, something begins to change inside them. anxiety about the future slowly begins to decrease. Instead of trying to control every detail of the journey, they begin to develop a deeper confidence that God is present and active in every stage of the path. A person begins to understand that discerning the path does not mean having absolute certainty about everything, but cultivating a continuous walk of trust, spiritual attentiveness, and alignment with God's will. And it is exactly at this point that the message of Jesus becomes even more powerful. Because he did not only reveal the path that leads to life, he also made a deeply personal invitation to all those who feel tired, burdened, or confused about their journey. At some point in life, many people reach a place of inner exhaustion. Not necessarily physical exhaustion, but a kind of emotional and spiritual weariness that comes after years of trying to find direction on their own. They make decisions, analyze options, make plans, change course, and keep moving forward. And yet, they still feel like they are carrying a weight they cannot fully explain. This kind of weariness does not appear only when life is full of problems. Many times it appears DVVKA in people who are trying to do everything right. Responsible people who make an effort, who want to build a stable life, and who want to make good decisions. Even so, there comes a moment when a person begins to realize that the journey of life can become extremely heavy when they try to carry everything alone. Part of that weight comes from the constant sense of responsibility. The responsibility to make the right choices, not take the wrong path, not waste opportunities, build a meaningful life, and deal with the consequences of every decision. Over time, that pressure can produce anxiety, insecurity, and even a deep sense of inner exhaustion. A person tries to predict the future, avoid mistakes, and make sure they are following the right direction. But the more they try to control everything, the more they realize they cannot control every part of life. It is exactly at that point that the words of Jesus become deeply personal. In Matthew 11:28, he makes an invitation that crosses generations and still speaks directly to the human heart. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This statement reveals something essential about the heart of Jesus' message. He does not call only the strong, the secure, or the spiritually mature. He calls precisely those who are tired from the journey, those who feel burdened by the decisions of life, and those who have already tried many times to find answers on their own. This invitation shows that the Christian faith does not begin with spiritual performance. It begins with an encounter. Jesus is not merely offering a teaching about how to live better. He is offering relationship. He is inviting people to come near to him and walk with him. When Jesus says, "Come to me," he is offering something profoundly different from what the world usually offers. The world often tells us that we need to try harder, plan better, control more things, and find the answers within ourselves. But Jesus offers another way, a way in which a person does not have to carry the journey alone. This invitation completely changes the way we see the search for direction in life. Instead of trying to solve everything with our own strength, we begin to learn how to walk with God. Walking with Christ means bringing our doubts, fears, decisions, and concerns before him. It means developing a spiritual life in which prayer, biblical reflection, and trust become part of our daily choices. That does not mean every question disappears immediately. The journey with God still includes moments of learning, growth, and even seasons when some answers are not yet fully clear. But there is one fundamental difference. The person is no longer facing the journey alone. Over time, those who learn to walk with Christ begin to realize something important. The direction of life stops being merely an intellectual search for answers and becomes a relational walk with God. The decisions still exist. The challenges still come. Important choices are still part of life. But now there is a deeper confidence that God is present in every stage of the path. That confidence changes the way a person deals with uncertainty. Instead of living under the fear of making mistakes or the anxiety of trying to predict every outcome, they begin to develop a posture of spiritual dependence. They learn to seek God's guidance, trust his timing, and understand that the journey of faith is not a solitary walk. Following Jesus does not mean every path becomes easy or every challenge disappears. Life still includes difficult moments, complex decisions, and situations that require courage. But it does mean that a person can have direction even in the middle of difficulty. And that direction completely transforms the experience of the journey. Because when someone chooses to walk with Christ, life stops being just a sequence of uncertain decisions and becomes a journey guided by someone who knows the destination perfectly. Throughout this video, we have reflected on a reality that many people experience at some point in life: the feeling of moving forward, making decisions, and continuing the journey, yet still not being sure whether the direction we have chosen truly leads to the life we hope to live. This feeling is not unusual. In fact, it is part of the human experience. Life presents many choices, many paths, and many voices trying to tell us which direction we should follow. In the middle of so many possibilities, it is natural for doubts to arise about which path truly leads to real life. Some people spend years trying to find that answer on their own. They analyze opportunities, follow advice, observe what others are doing, and try to build their journey as wisely as possible. But as we have seen throughout this reflection, the Bible reveals something very important. Not every path that seems right actually leads to the life God prepared. That is why the teachings of Jesus are so transformative. When he said, "I am the way," he was not simply offering another idea about spirituality. He was revealing that the true direction of life is not found only in human decisions, but in a relationship with him. Following Jesus means more than accepting a set of teachings. It means allowing him to influence the way we see life, the choices we make, and the direction we decide to follow. And when a person begins to walk with Christ, something profound begins to happen. The journey of life stops being a solitary attempt to figure out the right path and becomes a walk guided by God. This does not mean that all doubts disappear instantly. Life still includes challenges, moments of uncertainty, and difficult decisions. But there is one fundamental difference. The person no longer depends only on their limited perspective to find direction. They begin to trust someone who sees the entire path. That is exactly the kind of trust we see expressed in Psalm 37:23, where the Bible says, "The steps of a man are established by the Lord." This promise brings a deeply encouraging perspective. It reminds us that God is not distant or indifferent to the human journey. He cares about the paths we follow, the decisions we make, and the destination toward which we are moving. When someone decides to trust God and seek his direction, life begins to align in a different way. The path does not always become easier, but it begins to gain purpose. Choices start to reflect deeper values. Decisions stop being guided only by external pressure or human expectations and begin to be shaped by a sincere desire to follow God's will. Over time, a person realizes that spiritual direction does not mean having every answer in advance. It means learning to walk with God day by day, trusting that He is guiding every step of the journey. Perhaps you started this video feeling that very same inner question about the direction of your life. Maybe you are facing important decisions or simply trying to understand which path truly leads to peace, purpose, and the life God desires for you. If that is your situation, remember this truth. You do not have to discover the path alone. Jesus revealed the way, and He invites every person to walk with Him. If this message resonated with you and brought new perspective about life and faith, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here you will find more biblical reflections that help us better understand the spiritual journey, the decisions of life, and the purpose God wants to reveal to each one of us. And remember, in a world full of different paths, true life is not found in just any direction. It begins when we decide to follow the path that Jesus revealed.